Good morning. My name is Ted Dabrowski, and I'm from Warner Points, and I want to thank my colleagues who joined me here this morning in order of speaking. Ed Backra from the Center for Pension Integrity, Ken Gladish from the Technology and Manufacturing Association, and Josh Bendock from the Illinois Policy Institute. Our groups have come together as the Taxpayer Pension Alliance because we care deeply about the city and its future. We're advocating for real and sustainable solutions to one of Chicago's most pressing issues, its crippling pension crisis. Mayor Johnson has taken the correct step in convening a pension working group to examine solutions to this crisis. We're here to persuade the group and the mayor that any recommendations they make should be based on sound actuarial practices, because Chicagoans can't afford anything less. For nearly 15 years, I've watched Chicago's financial condition worsen, in large part due to ever-rising pension costs. I've reported on the collapsing of retirement security for Chicago's public safety workers as their pension plan assets nearly disappear. Equally concerning have been the difficulties for ordinary Illinoisans who are getting hit hard by higher taxes, worsening services, and for many, the difficult decision of whether to leave Chicago or not. The pandemic and the billions in federal dollars papered over the pension crisis for a few years, but with the federal money running out, and with Chicago and CPS once again struggling with budget deficits, retirement costs and pensions are going to become a big part of the conversation again. So I want to point out a few of the points where Chicago has become a national extreme outlier when it comes to this pension crisis. Number one, Chicago's pension crisis, by virtually every measure, is the worst of any big city in the nation. The city's pension funds are the ones closest to insolvency when you look at the big cities. A place like San Francisco has 96% of its pensions funded. A city that's in deep trouble and struggling with its own problems, but it doesn't have to deal with a pension crisis. Meanwhile, Chicago is at the bottom of the barrel when you consider the big cities. That, of course, leads to budget costs. They're far higher than anywhere else. In the second graphic here, data from S&P ratings shows that Chicago's fixed cost on general debt, on pensions, and on healthcare are higher than basically all the other cities that it competes with. Graphic 3 is a graphic that shows what rating agencies are saying about Chicago. Here's what they've seen. And we've all watched the city's credit rating fall to junk rating, only joining Detroit as the only other big city at junk level. Fortunately, the billions bailed out Chicago in the short term, and Chicago was upgraded from junk, but it's only one notch away. And I think the ultimate situation that shows up with all these problems is that Chicago and Detroit are the only two cities of the big cities in the country to lose population since 2000. Chicago's at the bottom, losing over 200,000 people since 2000, whereas places like New York and others have grown during that period. So there's a big structural problem here that needs to be addressed. So when you see across the board that Chicago is a national outlier, and that's the key problem, because Chicago is competing with all these other cities for people, for businesses, for towns. And this pension crisis harms Chicago's ability to compete and the lives and livelihoods of the people who live here. It's a direct threat to the city's future. That's why any potential recommendations from the working group cannot turn out things like a reamortization that pushes the pension debts further into the future. It can't ask for tax hikes when people are already getting hurt deeply. It can't call for more pension obligation bonds, which is just another chance for politicians to gamble with taxpayer money. And it certainly shouldn't call for any benefit increases until this pension problem is solved. Any of those such fixes would only prolong and exacerbate the city's problem. What I'd like to introduce now is Ed Backra, who will outline the core principles under which we believe the mayor's working group should follow as they put together their working recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. My name is Ed Backra. I am the founder for the Center for Pension Integrity. I'm also the co-author of a book that was published in 2019, The New Chicago Way, Lessons from Other Big Cities. I'd like to open my remarks by quoting Marx. What have future generations ever done for us? That quip was supposed to be funny, but in Chicago, we've asked future generations to pay for our government and our taxes. As Ted has told you, the Chicago is burdened by a crushing pension debt. As Mayor Johnson's pension working group studies the problem, they have superb professional resources right at hand. The Society of Actuaries, which is the national professional organization for actuaries, is based right out here in Schaumburg, Illinois. And the National Government Financial Officers Association is a mere 2 blocks away, right up LaSalle Street. Both organizations are composed of professionals who understand public employee pensions. In 2014, the Society of Actuaries convened a blue ribbon panel to study public employee pensions. Chicago's own Lawrence Massall, president of the Civic Federation, was a member of that panel. Here is a copy of their report, and we are making copies of their report available to the press and anybody that would like one. We will also be delivering one to the mayor directly after this press conference. So, among the key recommendations of the panel, they stressed 2 key concepts. The first is what they call adequacy, which they defined as funding pension plans fully, and that means 100%. And the second one is intergenerational equity. The idea that municipal services consumed today should be paid for by today's taxpayers, and if the cost of those services includes pensions, they should be paid for today and not borrowed from Marxist future generations. Speaking of the burden on future generations, in the information that we're providing to the mayor's working group, we note that from the pension plan's own reports, they will be paying off the current pension debt over the next 40 years. From 2040 to 2055, a 15-year period, payments for today's pension debt will total $86 billion. And I'd like to highlight the term billion. A lot of people think that since billions kind of sounds like millions, that, it's an abstraction. So I ask people to consider what 1 million seconds would be if we use common measures of time. And of course, the answer is 12 days. And then I ask them what 1 billion seconds would be, and it's 32 years. So this $86 billion worth of pension debt that we're paying off just in those 15 years is a measure of how immense this is. The previous 15 years, so which would be the next roughly 15 years, the amount is only $65 billion. This shows you how steep the ramp is. Those taxpayers in 2040 to 2055 didn't vote on this. In fact, none of us get to vote on pensions. They've always been a backroom deal run through the state legislature. So, in addition to talking about adequacy and intergenerational equity, the Society of Actuaries report also frowns on pension obligation bonds. Ted mentioned that, and I mention it again. And specifically, the GFOA, the Government Financial Officers Association, right up the street here, came out with a pronouncement in 2015, sternly advising any municipality against using pension obligation bonds. So, the SOA recommends that if a municipality finds its pension plan short of funds, it should catch up funding to 100% in a short period of time. They recommend 15 to 20 years. Chicago's pension ramps currently catch up to only 90% in 40 years. So Chicago's got a long way to go. As Mayor Johnson's working group studies the problem, they don't have far to go to find experts who can guide them with best practices. Oh, and that quote from Marx, that was Groucho Marx. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ken Pledge. I'm a Chicagoan since 1967 when we moved here. I'd like to share with you just a few brief stories about manufacturing in Northeast Illinois. The Technology and Manufacturing Association, who I work for, will be 100 years old next year, so we're pretty excited to have been around for all of Chicago's incredible manufacturing. I wanted to kind of take you through your day. All around you here in Northeast Illinois, we have manufacturers who are making precision components that go into everything that you don't think about that makes your day go by. So let's go through your day rather quickly. Your alarm clock has a whole bunch of components in it that has to work every time, otherwise you're late. Your coffee maker has a whole bunch of springs in it. Nobody thinks about springs, but that's a very important element. Your car, let's see, there's 40,000 components in there and they have to work, otherwise you don't make it here on time. Our members make an awful lot of those components. Finally, my favorite is you go to the office toilet and you look at the Sloan valve product there, taking away your waste. That's manufactured right here in Franklin Park. The cell tower allows these things. These are kind of important things that we kind of use. And the cell tower has all these important precision components in it that makes that work for you every single time. One of my favorites is you drive home down the expressway and you notice that there are light poles and they never fall over and they're always perfectly straight. One of our members manufactures everything that goes into the ground that you can't see. And then I'll even have my fun here. So Goose and Maverick both hold the ejector thing in the movie. One of the manufacturers in Schiller Park actually makes a key component that is all a part of that explosion about taking fighter pilots out of the planes. That's all manufactured right here. And the reason why I'm up here talking about supporting this pension issue is I'm a baby boomer, just barely by 2 years, but an awful lot of the owners of these manufacturing facilities are in my age group. And what are they doing? They're wanting to get out because they're getting older, so they're selling to larger entities. Larger entities need to find it comfortable to manufacture here in Illinois because they, amongst anyone else, would want to move that business, take those employees, and move that to another state. I mean, Pleasant Prairie is not that far away, and Indiana as well. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time and think about all those components that make your day go.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Van Dock, and I'm head of policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. Thank you for being here and being a part of this important conversation. Chicagoans are suffering under the crushing burden of debt driven by Chicago's worst in the nation pension crisis. Every Chicago home owes an average of $45,000 in unfunded pension liabilities. When my son Thomas moves out on his own, he'll immediately be the not so proud owner of this massive debt too. That's unfair. All Chicagoans are struggling under the burden of our current pension system. The debt harms the poor and disadvantaged and retirees the most. The poor don't get the services they need, and they can least afford to bear this burden. City workers, teachers, police officers, and firefighters retiring with security is at risk because the current pension system will eventually collapse and they'll be left with nothing unless we reform. 40% of Chicago's net appropriations in 2024, that's nearly $5 billion dollars, will cover debt and pension costs instead of helping Chicagoans and relieving the city's massive tax burden. These costs are crowding out more and more basic services every single year. That's inequitable. And this debt is a big reason so many people move out of Chicago every year. They can't bear the burden and all the harm it does any longer, so they leave. In 2022 alone, over 94,000 Cook County residents left the county. They fled. Losing friends and family members and neighbors hurts everyone. It's bad for business and it tears at the social fabric. The good news is, in his first budget, Mayor Johnson recognized pensions as a big issue by adding $307 million to the city's pension fund. The bad news is projected pension payments for 2024 came in at $335 million higher than originally projected. The only way to truly address this problem is through structural reform. Chicago will only right the ship by giving taxpayers a seat at the table of Mayor Johnson's pension working group. We know that tax hikes aren't the answer to this problem. Chicago already has some of the highest corporate, residential, and commercial taxes in the nation. And 97% of people who left Illinois in a recent census survey went to states with lower taxes. Taxpayers need a seat at the table to explain in plain terms how harmful this crisis is. The pension status quo in Chicago is unfair and inequitable. It hurts the poor and disadvantaged, retirees, and all Chicagoans. Chicago needs to unite and solve this problem together. And that means empowering taxpayers to help chart a better path. Thank you.
We'll take any questions.
Among the recommendations, and I think probably Ted, you would agree that of the things that you're asking the panel to consider, a lot of them are probably things that they would at least look at anyway if they're looking at pensions. But the last one, a ballot initiative for a constitutional amendment that replaces the current pensions clause, giving the General Assembly the power to remove the retirement security of public sector workers while reducing the pension burden on taxpayers. Spell out what that really means.
Yeah. So the question is, one of the things we have on our list of recommendations to be looked at, to be considered, and that we strongly recommend is an amendment to the pension clause. So as we all know, the pension protection clause says pensions cannot be diminished or impaired, and that has been upheld by the Supreme Court. So unless there's an amendment to that clause, and passed by the General Assembly, put into the Constitution, then it's impossible to reform pensions, at least to dramatically improve the situation. So we are calling for a change to the pension protection clause.
And you're calling for lowering pension benefits, correct?
Well, I think if you look at it broadly, we're not here to discuss the actual reforms because we're not a group that's done that. But if you look at where we stand, if you look at where we stand nationally on pension costs, on budget costs, and of course on credit rating, bottom in the country, it's going to take a reform of pensions, some form of a reduction in how we pay out future pensions, and how we manage either something like the COLA, how we manage the formula for pensions, et cetera. But yes, it will require some reforms. There's no way to solve this crisis without looking at the pension protection clause and a subsequent reform in those pension benefit payouts. I don't know if anybody in the crowd wants to add anything else.
I would just add that there have been polls that show that the voters in Illinois overwhelmingly would like to vote on something like this, or they'd like the General Assembly to do something about it. And I'd also add, it's been written about by many people in the Chicago and national press that Arizona and Rhode Island both had the same pension clause in their constitutions that we do. but they were successfully able to tackle their pension problems. So it's just a matter of, do we have the will to actually tackle the problem, or do we want to just persist with the problem?
If I may add, Craig, one of the things we've seen across the country, major reform, virtually every state in the country has reformed pensions in some way, either through an adjustment to COLAs or, there's different ways of reforming pensions. So we've seen it across the board. And as Ed just mentioned, so Arizona changed their constitution to do that, and it's passed federal muster. Rhode Island made major changes as well, and that's passed federal muster, federal contract clause law. So there's a lot of talk in Illinois and Governor Pritzker leads that we can't reform pensions, and that's just not true. We've seen it across the country, and we've seen constitutions actually changed, and the contract clause at the federal level challenged, and the reforms have won.
Yes.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is that I think that it's important to just begin by observing two realities. The first, and Ted has a lot of great data here, the reality is that this is a massive problem, and that the only way that we can do it is by starting a conversation with a constitutional amendment so that we have more avenues to actually fix this problem and to create a better reality for future Chicagoans.